It's another Stone Technology episode, and as always, we've got a lot to do. To start things off, we are going to do a spot of fishing, just in hopes of catching one of these. And then with our raw salmon, we are going to make ourselves a fish bait. And because I really cannot be bothered doing any more fishing, we are coming straight back to our mechanical crafter, and we will set it up to craft this recipe here. So let's power it on and get these components coming together, to eventually then spit us out a wooden fish trap. And with the wooden fish trap, we can then upgrade it to an iron trap, and then that iron one into a diamond one. And now with it, if we place it into the water and put in our fish bait, I have then pretty much automated fishing for us, so let's leave that alone for now and come back to it at another point. Now in the off time, I've been able to make up a few more of these thermal series mod machines, all apart from one, and that is the blast chiller, which will require some packed ice in order to make it. However, I have seen if we get a blitz mote from a blitz creature, we can then put that blitz mote into a fluid encapsulator alongside some water to then create a StoneBlock. And if we then put that StoneBlock into a multi-servo press, we can then get ourselves out some snowballs. And then with the snowballs, alongside redstone dust, glowstone dust, nether warts and a porcelain doll, we can make ourselves a freezing doll, which if we add this to a barrel of water, we can spawn ourselves a blizz, and if we then kill that blizz creature, we can get ourselves a blizz cube, which we can then turn that cube into some blizz powder, and alongside some gunpowder and coal, we can then make ourselves an ice charge, which we can then use alongside a bucket of water to create some ice. Man, that is a really convoluted way just to make some ice. In order for us to then summon a blitz creature, we will require a breezing doll, and then to add that to a barrel of lava. The recipe for the breezing doll is fairly simple, so let's make a few of those. And before we do summon that blitz creature, I am very quickly going to check on our fishing trap to see if it has collected us anything yet, which nope. We will come back to that at a later point to see if it has collected us what we're after. For now though, we will summon the blitz creature and then very carefully and very quickly murder it for our blitz mote. So if I now put the blitz mote and some buckets of water into the fluid encapsulator, they will have very quickly processed that into a StoneBlock, and if we put the StoneBlock into our multi-servo press, we get out our snowballs, and that is then everything we require for the freezing doll. So we will also summon the blizz creature then, and just like its blitz creature counterpart, we will very quickly just murder it. And there are our blizz cubes. So we'll turn those blizz cubes into our blizz powder, and then those blizz powders into our ice charges, and then finally turn those ice charges into our ice. And I think we are going to have just enough ice here to make the 2 packed ice that we require. So that is then everything we require in order to create the blast chiller. Before we move on to the next item on the list, we will once again quickly check on our fish trap. And yes, it has collected us the item we've been after. Thank you very much to the commenter who let me know that I could get a name tag from fishing, because with it, alongside some other components, we can now upgrade our luck to luckiest. Well, if we manage to get ourselves a rabbit's foot first. And hopefully that shouldn't be too much of a problem thanks to these rabbit baits. Right, let's clear all the objects here and get ourselves a rabbit. And this should be homely enough, so let's sit down the bait and see if we can attract any rabbits. And actually, whilst I'm at this, let's grab out some more raw fish, and I should then be able to turn those fish into some squid bait, which we will require some black dye, so we will need some ink sacs, and I will need to prepare this area a bit better. Or better yet, just prepare an entirely new area. So let's get some squids then spawning in. And while we wait on them spawning in, let's look into what I want to create next, which are these very, very handy Flux items. To start with, we will require a Flux controller, which will require Flux blocks, Flux dust, and a Flux core. The Flux dust is the main component required for all of these parts, which we can simply make by crushing a redstone dust between bedrock and an obsidian block. A lot easier said than done, I will admit. But then with the Flux dust, alongside obsidian and an Eye of Ender, we can then make some Flux cores. And with the Flux cores, alongside some more Flux dust, we can then make the Flux blocks. Which in turn is then everything we will require to make the Flux controller. And we will get into all of that Flux nonsense just in a second. I think we have some visitors that I need to attend to. Hello chap. I'm about to murder you. Well, we don't need to go into the details, but that's everything that we now require to upgrade our cleaver to luckiest. So we now have the best fortune perk for our sword, which most certainly will help later on. Oh, that's quite convenient actually, just whenever I was after some water. And we got 5 ink sacs from him. Perfect. So before we head off to get ourselves some Flux dust, I am just going to very quickly set up this blast chiller here alongside our magma crucible, which I will just simply place on top here at the moment. And if I set the bottom here to start inputting into the magma crucible, we will get some cobblestone out from the generator, which will slowly melt down here into some lava for us. That lava will eventually flow down into the blast chiller, which will freeze it here and eventually produce us some obsidian. And we will require a lot of obsidian for these Flux items, so I really need the lava to start being produced a bit quicker here. So let's grab out some of these components then, which we use to increase our induction smelter speed, and we will then just simply put them into the magma crucible here, and already I can see that's the lava starting to move a bit faster. And it has already been solidified within the blast chiller, so we can now pretty much infinitely make obsidian. One final thing that I want to get before we head out here for some Flux dust is to come to the sawmill and then put some birch logs to output us some sawdust. And with the sawdust, I can then create a cardboard box, which will come in handy a little bit later. But for now, let's get into the nether. Unfortunately, from where we have spawned in the nether, we are fairly close to some bedrock above. So I am very quickly going to start heading up before some nasties get us. Right, we have hit bedrock here, but I need a piece a bit further down. Yep, that is ideal there, so let's place the obsidian above and start throwing some redstone dust into the space in between. And that's looking good there, so if we now click on the obsidian block, that comes down and crushes the dust, and we have our Flux dust. And that is pretty much all we required there from the bedrock, so now let's head back to the fortress, where I have been hoping to find one of these, and if I place my cardboard box over it, I should now be able to pick up the blaze spawner. Perfect. Right, let's head home. Now that we're back home, the first item I would like to make is a Flux block, which will require a few Eyes of Ender in order to make the Flux core for it. The blaze spawner that we have will supply us with the blaze powder we need. It's the Ender pearls which are going to be the issue, or would have been the issue if it wasn't for the fact we could create a creeping doll, which if we add this to a barrel of witch water, we can spawn an Enderman. And witch water can be made by transforming normal water in a barrel over a block of mycelium. with mycelium being pretty easy to make, using some ancient spores which we got from sifting, and then placing them on some dirt to create our mycelium. So we have placed in our water, and it is slowly starting to transform into the witch water. And with the black dyes from our squid ink, we can now make ourselves the creeping doll. And hopefully this will be a nice simple way for us to be able to get some ender pearls. Thank you very much, luckiest perk. I actually want to try something here quickly. Right, Enderman, come with me. Yep, you run into those wires. Perfect. Although the perk didn't proc, but it was still fun. Because we now have some ink sacs, I can make myself a book and quill here, and if I combine that with a drawer key, I can create a quantify key, which if I then use on our drawers here, we can now see the quantities in the drawers, which will just be rather handy. Anyway, let's unpack this spawner then and get some blazes out so I can get their blaze rods. If we ever come across an Enderman spawner, we will be sure to do the same. But that's then both of those items now pretty much sorted for us. So we can now basically produce our own Eyes of Ender. Which is grand because these flux cores actually require a lot of them in order to make. But with the flux cores alongside flux dust, we can now start producing flux blocks. And alongside our obsidian that we can now make, if I place the obsidian block on top, throw redstone dust in between a flux block and the obsidian, we can now also produce our own flux dust here at home. So it's not before long then until we have everything we require to make the flux controller, as well as a flux point and a basic flux storage, and finally, most importantly, our flux plugs. So if I set down the flux controller and come into its interface, then we create a new network, my network, with a very secure password. If I now come down into our power generating room and place a flux plug just about there, then get an HV wire connector on top of it and connect that up to the main power, I should be able to come into the flux plug and select my network, and that should now allow power to start flowing through into it, which hopefully we will be able to see after we place down the basic storage network here, which is already connected to my network, and yes, that is slowly starting to fill up. And if I now disconnect the power to our obsidian making machine, then attach our flux points to them, and again just assign my network to them, our machines will spring back into life because they are now powered wirelessly. So no more long hanging cables for me. It's wireless power transmission all the way. Which will finally let me take off this damn Faraday suit that I keep forgetting to take off whenever I kill mobs. But it will also allow me to start placing down some of these machines in other places within our factory here. So we're not going to always be tethered to the main power grid, which ultimately is only going to help with our expansion here as we progress further within this mod. And that all sounds absolutely ideal to me.